What's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning back into the Mishmash podcast. Today, my guests are Bobby Smith, owner and founder of Reach Your Potential Training, and Dr. Sharon Wentworth, owner and founder of Elite Sports Physical Therapy. Guys, thanks so much for taking time to come and speak to me on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the reputation of RYPT is pretty far-reaching. We heard about you guys well before we ever stepped foot into the training facility, and I'm really excited to discuss not just what you do, but also the types of athletes that you work with, because I assumed it was really geared more towards professional athletes or college only, but you do seem to do a lot of work with younger athletes as well. But before we get to that, if it's all right with you, Bobby, I'd like to discuss how you actually got started with RYPT, because you have your own pretty substantial history with athletics, right? Going back at least to adolescence, if not childhood.
Definitely. Growing up, I was always playing all different types of sports, and then high school really, kind of took off and was, all-state running back for the football team. Basketball team, scored over 1,000 points, and then in the spring I was a track and field athlete, and I actually won the nationals for high school, and that's where I really started to see my potential, if you will, wow, this is something that I want to do moving forward. And then going into college, I was at Monmouth University, and that really allowed me to do two sports. A lot of colleges that I was talking to wouldn't let me do two sports or didn't want me to play running back. So Mom was like, hey, we can come here. We want you as a running back. You can go throw the javelin for the track team. Not a problem. So got there. And that's where, I really had the passion when it was probably in high school when I started lifting as well too. I had a gym. I was very fortunate at that time that there was a sports performance facility close by that really started to see the potential and see my progress when I started lifting. I was jumping higher, running faster, getting stronger. And then I was like, man, this is something that I can see myself doing, and then in college I had, 4 surgeries. I had 4 different surgeries in college. Wow. Yeah. So major sophomore year, running back, I was starting running back, running out to the right-hand side, and some big lineman jumped on my back and boom, tore my ACL.
Oh, wow.
And then I was rehabbing that back and then tore my meniscus in that same knee. And then going into the track and field, it was Duke Invitational meet, throwing the javelin, won the meet, blew out my elbow, had to get Tommy John surgery.
Oh my goodness.
So that was number 3. And I remember a doctor looking at me, he's like, maybe it's time to, maybe start pursuing something else. And I was no, man, this is my passion. This is what I'm doing. So battled through those, surgeries. And then my redshirt senior year, dislocated my ankle playing football, holding up someone, blocking, someone came behind me, boom, ankle. I remember going up on the training board, and my doctor or my athletic trainer took off my spike and my ankle just dropped. And I was like, broken? He's like, yeah, broken.
Wow. So that's interesting then. I feel like there's sort of a natural progression from athletics as a player to maybe coaching or things like that. You don't always see that shift into training, which I think is interesting and really important. It also takes a lot more work, I think. It's pretty easy, I guess, to put the ball down and pick the clipboard up. But what you do, it took a significant amount of education and just a lot more work to get it going off the ground, I'm assuming, right?
Oh, well, absolutely. And not even there. I continued on throwing, and I won the 2008 Olympic trials in the javelin. And then that got me into Olympic Training Center. And from there, that's when I started to learn from these Olympic gold medalists. And my track coach was amazing at there, and he was teaching me how to run, jump. And I was like, man, this is what I want to do. I want to bring these methods back to New Jersey, open up a facility, and teach young kids how to do these things that I wish I learned at their age. Because I was always a running back that didn't like to run because I didn't know how to run. I was always that slow white running back that just ran right up the middle. That was it. Get out of my way because I'm going to run you over. And then I started to learn, man, I can run fast, I can move, I can change directions. These are the things I want to teach these young kids.
So it's so funny that you say that, because I was just thinking of this last night. So for those who don't know, our introduction to RYPT was through my daughter, Sarah. So it's funny, we were at your facility for a one-off basketball training, and Sharon and I got to speak about RYPT, and it was exactly what I was looking for. So Sarah has always been in good condition. Conditioning wasn't the issue, but for some reason she ran like she had, she was wearing wooden shoes. She was always the last one up the court. And I said, I need something that's going to help her learn how to run, how to move. And last night I watched her. She was getting out in front of everybody on fast breaks, getting back on defense. It was a rough game, unfortunately, so there was a lot of running. But I saw the progress that she's made working with you guys, and I was like, oh, thank God! Like this is what we needed. And you said back to New Jersey. So your journey is taking you across the country?
I was out in California. Yeah, I was out at California at the time. I moved out there, had a training group that's called Reach Your Potential Training. So Todd Reach was my coach, and Sean Fury was my training partner. And that's when I won the 2008 Olympic trials. And then it got me into the Olympic Training Center out in Chula Vista, California.
Wow.
So I was like a full-time resident there training on site. It's like, everyone's dream. It's like going to college without going to school.
Right.
Yeah. You wake up, you eat, you train, you go back, you eat, you train, and then you relax. And I was like, man, like people like it's Groundhog's Day, and I loved it.
That's amazing. And Sharon, so you also have roots outside of New Jersey as well, right? You born and raised in Ames, Iowa? Or?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, I grew up in the Midwest. That my dad was a college professor at Iowa State University. So I grew up in a college town, and I have a little bit different beginnings, and I think it's because I'm a little bit older than Bobby, and I think youth sports were just kind of really starting to blow up at the time when I was going through them. And especially for girls. Girls were just kind of starting to get really into sports, and I was really lucky because I was in a college town that gave us a lot of exposure to athletics, and in a state where there's no professional athletics at all, there's no professional teams, everybody is a big college sport fan. Right. So, we went to all the Iowa State sports, wrestling and basketball and football, and my dad was really involved in the university. And he actually is a sociologist, and his original study was criminology and juvenile delinquency. And then when I started getting into sports, he started developing an interest in the sociology of youth sport and how it really affected young people and young girls specifically, because he had I had 3 sisters. Well, I was one of 3 girls. So it was kind of this evolution for me that I don't know anything else but it. Like I only ever wanted to do sports. Right. And that was just something that was kind of in my DNA in some way. And as I evolved with my sports, I started with softball. My dad became a softball umpire. When I started with volleyball, he became a volleyball referee. So he was kind of always going along with me. And then ultimately, when I got really, really involved in volleyball, that became my major sport. Going back a little bit, people in this area of New Jersey specifically don't realize how big girls volleyball is. So women's volleyball is actually the most played girls sport in the country, just not here.
Right.
We have field hockey, and we have a few things that are just kind of, I think, keeping girls volleyball from really exploding here in this little part of New Jersey. But in the Midwest, it's huge. It's bigger than soccer. It's bigger than basketball. So I had a lot of really great opportunities to do volleyball. And then interesting, I think when I think back, I was definitely mature for my age when it came to the whole recruiting and college situation. Because I think with my dad and working with Iowa State, I knew that I wanted to play in college. I knew that I wanted to play at a big college. I wanted like the big college experience. I also knew that I was 5'8", and that, the average women's volleyball player is 6 foot. And so I had this like understanding that the conferences that were really good for women's volleyball was Big 10, Big 12, and Pac-10. So it was the Midwest and the West Coast. And I thought, okay, well, then I'm going to go to a big conference that has big sports that isn't great at women's volleyball, so that I get a chance to play at my height. I mean, there's nothing I can do about my height. And so I had some really good, I was very technically sound at that point. My dad was coaching. He started the travel volleyball program in my community. So I had a lot of opportunity to get really technically good. And I ended up, looking at the ACC, SEC, Big East, and I ended up at West Virginia University on a volleyball scholarship. And interestingly, I was actually the first woman athlete from my high school to get a scholarship to play sports in college. That wasn't that long ago. And just think about the evolution since that time, right? So since the early 90s and through now, like every girl who plays a sport thinks they're going to get a scholarship in college, but just a short 30 years ago, it wasn't the case. So I had an amazing experience playing volleyball in college. I got to afterwards. I got to play overseas. I went to Israel to play volleyball, and then came back and dabbled in beach volleyball, because in our country we really don't have professional indoor volleyball. And that was really, like, I just felt like volleyball gave me so many opportunities. It was an amazing journey for me, and I knew it was always going to be a huge part of my life. And so I knew I wanted to do something in sports. So when I started college, I was pre-med. I thought I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. So that switched quickly when I decided that just didn't fit my lifestyle. I just didn't want to do, surgery on a sleeping person and then not see them again. I really loved interacting with athletes. And so that was kind of my catalyst into physical therapy. So, but yeah, I have had a lot of good, really great experiences with sport. And so that's what I think drew like Bobby and myself to each other. We both have these sport experiences in our past that, that were wonderful experiences. Not everyone has wonderful sports experiences.
Absolutely.
So we have been very, very fortunate in athletics.
And I agree. One of the interesting things to me about sports is something that you just pointed out, and it's the fact that there really is a plethora of options within sports beyond just being a player in terms of career choices and stuff. And as a parent of 3 athletes, but 2 who really have no plan B yet, like this is, Jackson came out of the womb saying basketball player, right? Yeah. And some people laugh, because it's a ridiculous dream on its face because of the numbers, right? The statistics involved in terms of even being a college player, let alone professional. But my mentality is, if he reaches for that, how much further is he going to land, even if he doesn't make it all the way there? The opportunities that are going to be presented to him may lead him in different directions, but it's all going to come from that journey. And it's the same for you guys to look at where you are now versus, you had great playing careers too, and now you're off doing, these amazing jobs. I'm curious though, in terms of the landscape, so you referenced how different it is now versus when you were coming up as a player. Maybe I hope Caitlin Clark isn't a curse word being, from Iowa instead of Iowa State. But I love how much, I don't know if you guys remember, even just a couple of years ago, I remember there was this sort of scandal with, I think it was the basketball tournament where they showed the women's weight room. And there's quotes with that. I mean, it looked worse than like a crappy hotel, like a 2-star hotel weight room. To see how far just since then things have come. And obviously there's still so much more to go with it. But do you feel like there has been like a significant influx or increase in the involvement in sports for young girls? Or, is it still kind of the same from when you were coming up? Or
Oh, no, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a huge increase of involvement in girls' sports. I think it's just become a lot more mainstream for them. The stigmas aren't there that, they kind of used to be. And now there's this I think with the idea that a girl can get a scholarship to college to play a sport, that really, like with the whole Title IX thing and everything that came around, I think that really legitimized girls playing sports. And so I don't, it's funny because when I think back, I don't really remember ever feeling completely dissed by the male side of sports. I just remember being the only girl in the weight room at my high school. And I remember, being we had our own little small weight room, and the football team at West Virginia had this amazing, big, huge weight room. But to me, that just seemed okay. It was kind of relative to the level of the enthusiasm of the sport at the school. This is the level, there's 200 people watching volleyball and 100,000 people watching football. So it all just made sense to me. But I think it has like the opportunities for girls to play sport, and I guess just like the legitimacy of them playing. So, now you watch them play and it's just their level has risen so much in the last few years that, you can watch them play and be like, wow, this is good sport. Like you're watching good ball.
Absolutely. I remember, I'm sure when we were growing up, it was the same in the sense of like, if you were told you throw like a girl, it was an epithet. It was meant to put you down. And Sarah played on an undefeated flag football team. And I remember they had a girl who could sling it. And it was I thought it every time she threw a bomb for a touchdown, I was like, yep, that's what throwing like a girl is like. So Bobby, I've assumed that your clientele, again, steered more towards the male side or more towards like a certain age group. But in actuality, it's really more female athletes that you work with.
Yeah, I
Is
would
that
say
correct?
around 60 to 40% is, 60-40 for girls to guys.
Wow.
And we do see a lot of girls, but we do see, I would say, the guys that we see is more Olympic sports. So more basketball, baseball, soccer, and it's the right type of guy because our program's hard. Like when I was in high school, I probably wouldn't have lasted, to be honest with you. It's 90-minute sessions, 45 minutes is on the turf, and then we're hitting weights 45 minutes in. So a lot of guys don't have the work capacity to handle that training session, and they're all about, oh, let me see how much I bench. Let me see how much I bench. And it's like, if you're worried about your bench, you're going to be sitting on one because no one cares about that. I mean, yes, it's cool to brag in front of your guys, friends, but it's about how well you can move, how well you can bend, how well you can jump. That's going to make the biggest difference.
So this is something I was really looking forward to asking you about. So I'm not an expert in fitness by any means, but it is a strong passion of mine. And one thing that I notice more than anything else is, and maybe I'm not in the right gyms for this, but it seems like there's a lack of attention to detail with a lot of people in terms of technique. And from what I've learned in my own personal experience and the research that I've done, technique is the single most important thing. It has no bearing on how much weight you can do or whatever. And you mentioned the bench. Like I've seen guys flinging, 225, but they're bouncing it off of their chest, or, they're doing these like quarter reps and not even at like the end of a set. Cause I understand, there's a place for partial reps, but not, as an entire set. What emphasis, if any, do you place on technique in what you do in terms of the training?
Right. That's everything. It's everything we start off with. And that's why we have such a good coach to athlete ratio, is so we're watching everything. So they're doing things correctly. Everyone has their own card, so they're tracking down their progress, and we're watching them do and perform those exercises, especially when we get into those major lifts. So we're doing it correctly. We're not just chasing numbers, because we need full range of motion. That's what athletics is full range of motion. And I remember we're at the Olympic Training Center, and all these foreigners were coming in, and they were going all the way up and all the way down doing their Olympic cleans, and we're just doing these hang cleans with short little reps, and they were like laughing at us. And I'm like, what's so funny? Like, you Americans, you're so dumb. Or like, you're looking so heavy, but you're not doing it right. And it was just kind of like that light bulb moment where it was like, oh man, they're starting from the ground, they're going all the way down, all the way up over their head, and like, that's what we need.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense too. And it's frustrating. See, I feel bad because I want to see people succeed in whatever they do. And it kills me at the gym when I see people who aren't fully committed to their education, right, in terms of what they're doing. And so, again, maybe they're swinging their arms and they're using this momentum to get, weights that are maybe 15 pounds heavier than they should be using, but they're engaging the wrong muscles. They're doing it the wrong way. And I feel like that can ultimately lead them to injury or something in the long run. So in terms of, for Sharon, in terms of the athletes that you work with, first of all, I find it interesting, right? We discussed how a lot of physical therapy offices have different focuses, right? So for some, it's surgery rehabilitation, or they work with older folks. I know one of the places I go to, they're McKenzie certified, so it's more back and spine. But you guys really focus primarily on athletes and helping them get back to what they were doing, or even to be better than they were when they walked in. Is that accurate?
That's correct, yeah. So the thing about physical therapy is the education is 3 years of a very, very general education. So it would be like going to your first 2 years of medical school. When you come out, you are qualified and capable of going in many, many directions. And that's what physical therapy school is. So they don't really do any kind of specializing in school. So for the therapists that come out of school, they could do anything, and it's so vast. So they could do, work with spinal cord injuries or people with amputations or kids with cerebral palsy or a geriatric population. None of those have really anything to do with working with a 15-year-old athlete who tore their ACL. They're very, very different. So coming out of school, you have to choose where you want to specialize. And you do all your continuing education and your research and everything in the direction that you want to specialize in, if you want to specialize. But just like medicine, you could be a general practitioner. Like, your GP that you go to has a little bit of knowledge in a lot of things. And that's what most physical therapists do. They have a little bit of a knowledge in a lot of things. So general orthopedic outpatient is, there's a place on every corner. I mean, they're popping up. Like, there's literally, if you go up down by us, there's literally one back to back to back on like the highway,
right.
on Route 35, just one after the next. Most of them like to use the word sports or athletics in their title because it's good marketing. It's glamorous. Like, why wouldn't you want to go to the place where the athletes go? But statistics show that less than 5% of the population getting physical therapy are actually competitive athletes. So 95% of the people getting orthopedic outpatient physical therapy are active adults, older adults, geriatric. It's just our population. It's our demographics right now. People are living longer, they're living healthier, and they want to stay mobile and healthy. So very large population of geriatrics that get physical therapy. So all of those outpatient places are general ortho. We just call them like Gen Pop, general
right.
population. So there's just a need there was a need that I saw, and I always knew I wanted to work with athletes. I mean, I started off right out of school doing a residency in sports physical therapy. So I knew right away, and I was working with Montclair State with their athletics and getting my athletic training certification, and I worked with Monmouth University with their athletics right out of the training room. So I literally was never really in general pop. I always knew I wanted to do sports. Interesting, I became a physical therapist without ever having a major injury. So a lot of people get into physical therapy because they had major injuries. I had no major injuries all the way through high school and college. Ankle sprains here and there. I mean, injuries are part of sport.
Right.
But no major injuries that led me to physical therapy. And actually, my third year of PT school, I tore my ACL.
No, oh wow.
Which is kind of ironic, and that became my passion. But so when I started Elite, I knew there was this hole in physical therapy. There was general pop physical therapy, which was mostly an older population. There's pediatric, which was mostly developmental, neurological, working with babies all the way through, young children who had maybe a cerebral palsy or like things that they needed developmental neurological work. And neither of those environments was somewhere where a 15-year-old kid who tore their ACL playing sports and was going to need 6 months of physical therapy could thrive in emotionally.
Right.
And so I knew there was this gap. And I think it was just this natural evolution then to realize that the body of knowledge of sports performance and the body of knowledge of sports physical therapy needed to meld together to work with this very small population of people. And I'm the dummy who started a whole business on 5% of the people who go to physical therapy. So I knew I wanted to have this be a real niche practice. So, when I was starting up, I had the support of the orthopedic surgeons who worked for Monmouth University. They were the guys on the sidelines at all the football games, high school football games and stuff, and they were really supportive of me from the beginning. And if someone called me up out of the, who just like happened to live around the corner and like, oh, I got in a car accident and I need neck, I'm like, sorry, that's not what I do. And that was horribly scary because I was growing a business.
Right.
It was the best thing I ever did. So now we've really stuck to our mission. I started this business over 20 years ago, sticking to our mission. And now, we're in one of the biggest things I knew was I didn't want to be limited by my facility. So if you're truly going to do sports physical therapy and return to sport, I didn't want to be out in the parking lot kicking a soccer ball. Like, I needed space. And so that's how we ended up in this big, like 16,000 square foot facility.
It's gorgeous, by the way, both the
you.
office and the facility itself.
Sharing space with, living harmoniously with him, with RYPT, and really realizing that we can meld the two businesses together, the two bodies of knowledge together. Some of my employees work for him and back and forth. And it's been this kind of perfect storm of things to allow us to be having these businesses together and for them to be thriving. So that's kind of how I originally started Elite and realized that it needed to be a real specialized niche, because not everyone knows how to work with this population, just like I don't know how to work with some of the other populations in physical therapy.
And I can appreciate how terrifying it must be to have that singular focus almost, right? But I also think of it in terms of like whether you're maybe a restaurant or a bakery or a brewery, there are places that make everything, but they don't do any one thing particularly well. And maybe they, are able to succeed because of that. but when you're able to do that one thing better than anyone else does, and clearly you do, I think that's, a boon for everybody. And you referenced all the other practices that you see going up and down on 35. Bobby, I'm curious. So it seems like there's regulation where physical therapy is concerned, right? I mean, there's a certain certification and vetting that needs to be done.
It's a licensed profession,
and you
have to have a doctorate in it. So you have to have the proper education, and you have to pass your boards. And
I think it's so cool that you get to the title of doctor. But what about for Bobby and I? Can we go as Master Bobby or Master Matt?
I think you should.
I mean, listen, the fact that I find it hilarious that I have a master's in English and I grew up in Brooklyn, I think that would stun a lot of people, right? It's kind of funny there. But I don't know how much of a crossover, Bobby, that this pertains to your training, what you do, right? But on the fitness side of things, social media has been such, I don't want to even call it a blessing and a curse, but like there's just an unending supply of what I consider misinformation or just not properly vetted information. And it's scary to me that it's so readily available for people. And people are inherently lazy. I'm not going to get up on the soapbox, but people just want what they want, and they want it quickly. They want it now. And so I feel like if you look the look on, Instagram, let's say, if you look like you know what you're doing, I think people just automatically assume that you do. But clearly, that's not the case, especially when you're dealing with something like technique and form and everything that's so important. Have you found that to be a challenge in your, in your field, dealing with people that, maybe competitors that have nowhere near the level of knowledge or backing that you do?
Well, let's start from the beginning of that question. One, there is no regulation. So if you want to open up a gym, you can go and open up a gym and start training kids.
Oh, wow.
Which is crazy to think that. And I remember it was probably back in 2018 where I was out speaking a lot. I have a couple educational products, and I started really getting, popular on social media. And I was doing these crazy, stupid exercises that I would never do on anyone else but myself that were getting a lot of views. And I was like, man, this is great. I'm starting to get so many views on these exercises. And I was like, who would I ever do these with?
Right.
No one. I would never do these with any one of my athletes, but it's really popular on social media and everyone really liked it. And I was like, is this the angle that I want to take? And I was like, no, this is not where I want to, pursue my social media, expertise. And that's where I was kind of like started taking a back seat and realizing, what am I doing with my athletes? This is what I need to be showing, because this is what people need to be seeing, because this is what they should be doing. So that's where I started, changing my mindset of social media. And for me and Rip personally, it's more showing our athletes and how we train them properly to get the results that we get. So it is tough because anyone can open up a gym, and we do lose a lot of kids. We had a guy come in that would send us a lot of kids, and all of a sudden he's training them at a karate studio, and he's a police officer, and he's like, yeah, I just figured, why am I sending you all these kids? I can be making all this money.
Right.
And then it's like, well, you're not doing what's right for the kids.
Right. And it's a credit to you, because I feel like the temptation is so easily there in terms of social media, especially if you start to get traction, to want to continue in that trend. And it's funny, so many like prominent YouTubers, they reach a point of burnout because it's not really what they wanted to do, but they just got caught in that swell. So the fact that you were able to recognize that and sort of pivot into a direction that I feel is much more worthy and valuable, I think is great. For what it's worth, I think your content is phenomenal. And I love personally, so for those who don't know, your son Brady and my son Jackson are finally teammates, which is great for the Short Shots. AAU basketball program, and I love seeing the content that you provide of working with Brady, because that's something that's been incredibly important to me with my own kids. Really started more during COVID, because I looked around, this was April, so we're a month in. I'm like, man, I got to get these kids moving. Like, we have to go. And, we were running 5Ks. I was trying to come up with exercises that we could do in the backyard, and not just to burn, calories and waste time, but I wanted to, sort of instill that idea that fitness is important. It's important for mental health. It's important for physical health and everything. So what kind of work do you do with Brady, and how much does it differ from what you would do, say, with actual clients? Right. If you don't mind discussing.
No, yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of people see what I do with Brady and think that I'm doing these, advanced special exercises. And I literally do the same thing with him that I do with my athletes at the gym. Because, like I said, it's like, we're not building, like, even if I'm building a mansion or building, a little back house, the foundation needs to be set. So we need to have the basement of the pyramid to be set so I can start building those levels with him. And right now it's just fundamental movement patterns that we instill, regularly. And it's a little boring, if you will, because it's like doing, planks and doing push-ups, doing pull-ups and these exercises with him. He's like, Dad, are we going to change it? I'm like, well, we're progressing in more sets and more reps or more time under tension, but we still have to master these movements first.
And so then in terms of cross-training, because Sharon and I were speaking about this yesterday, it's so funny. Like, so my kids do Hoop Lab basketball skills training, and there's a lot of basketball work with a basketball in hand, but there's a lot of work that doesn't entail that. It's weighted tennis balls, it's other implements. And I can't get over how many people like sort of mock it online and go, oh, I'm sure this will help my kid anytime he's got a tennis ball in the middle of a basketball game. And the short-sightedness just kills me, because there's so much that's gained by doing things from a different way. I don't know. I just feel like the brain mapping that you're doing through cross training is really critical. Do you employ that with Brady and with your clients as well, in terms of, like, regardless of whatever their sport is, do you have them do other types of movements and stuff?
Well, we do, and like simple things, like one of my favorite lifts is like a split squat, and like getting them to get that single leg push motion, and then realizing to them, like, look at this position, look at my running position, see how it's the same exact position. So if I get stronger in this exercise, I'm going to get faster and I can run and produce more force. And that's when you get that moment where, like, oh, this exercise is really important. And you're like, yes, it might be boring, but this is the exercise that we need to do, and start loading it. So that's how they're going to become faster.
Yeah.
So it's just educating them.
Right. Absolutely. And I feel like in terms of, so building those like supportive muscles and stabilizers and everything, I think is really critical. And I don't think there's a lot of emphasis placed on that. I'm curious if that, contributes to the prevalence of certain injuries like ACLs. And for Sharon specifically, I feel like a torn ACL is like common consciousness, right? Everybody, even if you're not into sports, you've heard of that injury. But I feel like most people just associate it maybe with basketball players or football players, and males in particular. But it's a significant issue for female athletes. Is that correct?
Well, it's actually more significant with females. They say it's up to 10 times more prevalent in female athletes than male athletes. So
10 times?
Significant.
Wow.
Very significant. So it's kind of part of the reason why originally maybe Bobby started with more female athletes, because I was working, my ACLs is my specialty, and the prevalence of female athletes tearing their ACLs is so high, and those athletes, and by the way, the athletes that are tearing their ACLs are usually the best athletes. And it's an interesting phenomenon, but it tends to be a moment in time where it's a changing of direction or a deceleration. So they either are coming down from a jump, or they're stopping to make a change in direction. And the bodies that are moving the quickest and the shiftiest athletes that are out there are also producing a lot more force, and the ligament just can't handle it. So strangely, like the little athlete who's kind of doesn't get in much and a little hesitant, just isn't moving fast enough. It's my theory, to be tearing their ACL. So we see these great athletes, these amazing athletes that are tearing their ACLs, and many of them moved on to train with Bobby, and many of them became Division I college athletes. And so that was a really a good initiation for his business to really focus on, working with female athletes and that kind of thing. As far as injury, with the training situation. So what I always say is I truly believe that bad training is worse than no training. So the problem that people don't recognize, I think the general kind of layperson and the general population, that what they don't recognize is there's a difference between athletic-based training, where you are training the body for an athletic endeavor, versus fitness. So, if you go to Jersey Strong and you're just doing fitness and your goal is some weight management and general overall strength and looking good and having a healthy lifestyle, that is not the same as training for an athletic pursuit, because the demands of a sport are so much significantly heftier than the demands of life. And so we were finding, one year I had a team, a girls soccer team, high school team, whose assistant coach was a CrossFit trainer, did CrossFit all summer. And in the first 2 weeks of the season, they had 5 girls tear their ACLs.
Oh my gosh.
It's absolutely not preparing them for that activity. And so if you go into a sport that's as vigorous as high school soccer, you need to be physically prepared for that. And that is why it's a science. That's a reason why you can get an undergrad and a master's degree and a PhD in exercise physiology, exercise science. There's a huge body of research and knowledge behind what is needed to properly train both male and female athletes to be prepared for their athletics physically, not just in a performance way, but in an injury prevention way as well. And I say prevention with quotes all the time, because you can't prevent injuries in sports. I mean, they're part of sports. What we try to do is lower the risk and maybe lower the severity. So you have less days missed. That's right. The whole goal. And so when I see these, especially female athletes, so there's a lot of speculation out there as to why girls tear their ACLs more than boys. And a lot of it is just kind of a physiological or biological situation where girls, the female gender, has things that are kind of putting them in a position that makes them more at risk for this injury. So as we grow, our hips get wider. There's purpose in that situation, but from a wider hip base, then the femur bones come down at a bigger angle. Well, most people tear their ACL when their knee goes inward. It's an inward type of emotion that usually puts the ACL in that tension to tear it. So as a female, our knees are already going inward. And so we're halfway to tearing our ACL, just standing still. And so there's some things about that. We have less muscle mass. We have a different center of gravity. We have different things causing different gravitational pulls on us, and versus the male athlete. Those are things we can't change. There's hormonal things that are going on in females. There's many things that may be leading to this epidemic. I mean, in female athletes, it's at an epidemic level. It's a crazy situation. We hear more about men because of the NFL. Right. A lot of football players. But Paige Beckers, I think, is a notable one, right? Exactly. So. And she is, and she had a great outcome. So I love that she had a great outcome, because I always say, listen, I don't know if you saw the movie Friday Night Lights. It's an old football movie. So it's a true story of a 1980s football team out of Texas, high school football team, and there's Booby Miles. He's their number one player. It's 1980 takes place, and he tears his ACL, and it's career ending. I mean, he's in a cast up to here. It's career ending. That is completely not the case anymore. So we've evolved so much with this injury, with this surgery, with this rehab, that now if you put the work in, good surgeon, good physical therapy, and you do the right work and the right kind of training, you can be the Paige Beckers. You can come. I mean, Bobby tore both his ACLs. I tore my ACL, and we both did professional athletics afterwards. So I always say this is a little bit of a hurdle, but it's not a death sentence. Right. And I think in terms of your training, right? So RYPT
seems like an important part of the equation at both in terms of preventative, right? Helping potentially to strengthen the legs, the core, everything to potentially reduce that risk. And then I'm assuming also in terms of rehabilitation, right? So once they're through physical therapy, do you work with those athletes to help them, sort of recover that strength and get back to the level they were at, or?
Yeah, I mean, she does a great job taking them up to the point where they're ready for, that group training setting. And that's what we do is like, not only do we get them to where they were, but even better after this surgery.
Right.
And I was just curious. So we were discussing this again yesterday, and I found this absolutely fascinating. So the question that I had posed to Sharon was, why is there such a precipitous drop off in terms of female involvement in sports, seemingly centered around like 12, 13? And I feel kind of stupid after I got your answer because I realized how obvious it was. But would you be willing to discuss that a little bit? Because you kind of touched on some of it in your previous answer.
Yeah. And I also find it to be interesting. So I do think it's a little bit multifaceted in terms of why young girls are dropping out. I mean, first of all, up until, when they're starting in the very early ages of sport, it's co-ed. So you see a lot of co-ed basketball, co-ed soccer, and, there's not much of a difference between the little 5-year-old girls and the little 5-year-old boys. They're all kind of in it at, running around like a hive of bees and on the soccer field, right?
It's adorable.
And then, a couple years go by, and then you're talking first, second grade, and the girls might even be more advanced than the boys at that point. They might even be a little bit taller, a little bit older, a little bit more coordinated. And so again, you kind of see, like we were saying, if you see a second grade team of girls on the flag football team or on a basketball, there's a good chance they're going to beat the boys, so they're very equal. And then as the years go by, there is puberty. And unfortunately for us females, when boys hit puberty, they become a sports car. So they go from a normal car to a sports car. They gain more muscle, they get more testosterone, they have the capacity and the ability to get stronger and bigger and faster. And girls, basically, their engine kind of remains the same, but they become a vehicle that needs all the energy to go to just their their development, becoming a woman. And so the levels of hormones change, and we're not gaining testosterone.
Right.
So we don't have the capacity to gain muscle mass as much. There's a necessity for just some protection of reproductive organs. So there's some increase in adipose, which is like fat tissue. Our hips get wider. Our weight distribution changes. We get this kind of lower center of gravity. And so here's the boys that are like revving up, and the girls that are really just struggling to be an organism that was kind of what we're kind of designed to be, unfortunately, is to be able to procreate and have children, have babies. So there's a challenge for girls at that age to maintain athletic ability. And sometimes that challenge is just too much. They feel that they either think they're going to get big and bulky, and then they're going to look too manly, which is crazy because they don't really even have the capacity for that.
Right.
So there's like a stigma in it. At 13, or menses now is like 11 to 13. They're starting to think about themselves in a more girly way, and then so there's just still this kind of societal, I don't know if it's a stigma or an idea that, boys play sports and that's cool. And girls, start to get really into fashion and start to get into music and this and that. And so it is a natural kind of age for the girls to kind of start to find other interests, because it's hard at that age to continue to play sports. You have to really put the work in. And whereas boys are just getting good,
Right.
So So it is really challenging. But what it does is the girls who stay with it, they get good. They put the work in, and then there's this, like, what we're seeing are these role models that are popping up. I mean, why do you think that we had this huge, like, worldwide phenomenal reaction to Caitlin Clark? I mean, it's amazing. I think right now there's like, it's not even Caitlin. The two girls, Angel Reese and what's her name, who are going to Chicago to play WNBA, their jerseys just sold more than any NBA jersey. Like, this is a phenomenon that all of a sudden there's some female role models that look, like even Paige Becker's, like, she's got the long blonde hair, and they're still girls, and you're watching these, some of them are 6'7", but but you're watching these women, and now these girls can relate, and I think that's going to really push girls staying with it, and then kind of getting through the hard work that has to be done. But it's still, I mean, it's never going to be equal, because just the amount of opportunity for boys to play professional sports, there's much less opportunity for girls. And so, it's just the opportunities are just uneven.
Right. And I think a lot of that, unfortunately, is the corporate side of things, right? So you mentioned earlier about 200 people coming to see the girls play volleyball versus 100,000 to fill a football stadium. So much of that is fueled by advertising dollars. I mean, I think there's so much more unrelated to the actual athletes and athletics themselves that sort of, fuel that. And it's interesting that you mentioned sort of the appearance aspect of it, right? Because I feel like there's a certain stereotype or a certain stereotypical view of what maybe a female basketball player looks like versus a female volleyball player, or even like women's tennis and women's golf athletes. I don't know if there is that case in terms of like the body type. Do you notice that if there is a difference in terms of like the sport you pursue, do you find more women to sort of fit a certain mold? Or because I feel like watching more women's college basketball, there are girls of all shapes and sizes and skill sets and abilities. So it really is more diverse than I think people realize.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that because there's more girls that are kind of hanging in there and staying on through the hard years of preteen and teenage years and pushing forward. One of the things that, and I think, and Bobby talks about this a lot, he has a whole presentation on training the female athlete. One of the reasons girls do sports is for community. So their friends are doing it. So then they want to do it. And that is a really strong pull, but not strong enough to keep them going when everyone's getting good and maybe they're just not.
And it could work against them too, right? Not to interrupt, but if the girls one by one start to fall off and start forming these social cliques, I would imagine in middle school is probably where it begins. And then even in high school, then maybe they don't want to be left out on that side. I hadn't considered puberty or like the physiological side of it. I thought of more of like the social pressures of wanting to fit in and whatnot, because like you said, I feel like the girls who are fully committed through high school and into college, like that's their singular focus. So the social scene may not matter to them because they're more worried about getting into the gym, for an extra workout at 6 a.m. instead of, going to the mall or whatever it is that kids do these days. Well, I'm dating myself there, huh?
Right. Yeah, no one goes to the mall.
Yeah, no one goes to the mall anymore. It's all online.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, look at someone like Caitlin Clark. She had older brothers. That is a theme on a lot of women athletes, right? So they have models of some sort or experiences of athletics that are good and push them, and they like have that mentality of kind of they just kind of grow into it because their brothers do, or their brothers are beating on them all the time, and they become really tough, and they kind of evolve, and so that they keep pushing forward. But the vast majority of young girls are kind of doing sports for the social side of it. And when it becomes really intense and really hard, and now especially in our youth sports environment, there's very little opportunity to do it for fun. I mean,
Right.
when we were younger, and there was Parks and Rec, and there were all these recreational opportunities, those really have pretty much almost gone. So it's really either you do sports seriously, pay a lot of money, commit a lot, and then stay with it, or you don't. And that's like boys are going to be more likely to continue to push forward because they're having success as they get through those ages versus the girls.
Right. And I have a question about being parents in this sort of crazy sports world, but just as an end cap on that conversation, you mentioned sort of an interest in fashion, right, for some of these college athletes and professional athletes. I think it's great that, like, I think it was during the WNBA All-Star Weekend that they had not really a fashion show, right, but an opportunity, a red carpet, essentially, for a lot of these athletes to come out and show their interests in fashion styles, not in terms of the sexualization of it, which is different. And I think in terms of sports consumption, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like there's got to be a skewed, it has to be skewed in terms of viewership towards the male side of things, right? And so I feel like because of that, I feel like men watch women's sports differently maybe than they watch men's sports. I don't think they necessarily think about how the guys are looking, on football teams or basketball teams. But I think it's inevitable that, the what do you call it? The female athlete is sort of going to be objectified or at least analyzed like that. I mean, I'm sure you guys heard about like issues with different uniforms and shapes and things of that nature. So that's something that I feel like maybe is slowly changing a little bit, because anytime, I would say 10 years ago, even maybe as early as 5 years ago, anytime anybody talked about women's basketball and they tried to do so in a positive way, the scare quotes, it was always, it's just so fundamentally sound. They play great. And it, like, to the point that it became a backhanded compliment, because it's what you're saying is there's no flashy dunks. That's really what it comes down to. And I don't know, it's just weird. Whereas now, especially everybody getting into LSU and South Carolina and Iowa and all these big schools, like, they don't really speak about it the same way anymore from the guys' side of things. Like, I was out at a brewery with two guys, and we were talking about the women's tournament, not the men's tournament, and talking about it as if it was an NBA game or an NFL game. But just to shift gears to the parental side of things, how do you guys feel about sort of the state of modern youth athletics in terms of either being overcommitted, having to feel the pressure of having your kids involved in different things? I mean, there's a lot of different directions we can go in with this. So I just kind of throw it out. I guess, sorry, Bobby.
Yeah.
You went through this as an athlete yourself. How different is it now as a dad trying to navigate it for your boys?
Well, even like we're doing the evaluations for short shots, and there was 40 kids in 2 courts going on, and there was 2 coaches there, and then there was probably 4 other coaches sitting there with clipboards evaluating these kids at 10. And I was like looking at Sharon, I was like, I never went through anything like this till I was in high school. Like, that's intense for a 10-year-old to be going through this.
And one of them's like Mike Rice, who was a Division I college basketball coach.
Sitting there screaming at him. Right. So
Mike has just the one volume.
Yeah, so. Right. So I think, everything's happening younger, Like, it probably started a couple years ago at 12, and now it's starting at 10. And it's just the intensity that we're putting these kids through is, challenging. It's going to be mentally draining on them. And that's where, like, for us, like, like two days a morning, I'm training Brady doing lifting, and that's my time with him. And yes, we're having some fun and fooling around, but then there's also like, all right, this is time, let's work. And then the other 2 days a week that we're going to the school, and we have like a morning shoot around for 45 minutes before school. And I think that's really good for him, because then he's sitting in class, and he needs to get active right in the beginning of the day. And I think that helps set his foundation for school.
100%. And I love that you referenced it that way, because whether it's youth athletics or people's own fitness journeys and stuff, if you view it as work, it will be work. And for me, at least, especially going to the gym, like, it's just a part of my life. It's no different than eating, And where the kids are concerned, those moments, I think, are bonding opportunities. Like, those are the memories that we're going to make with our kids. And hopefully they're good ones. I mean, I can try, we'll see, but even just people complain about the travel. Yes, the travel is inconvenient, but how many conversations did I have last night with Sarah driving out to Monroe, 40-minute drive from Hazlitt? It doesn't have to be a negative thing. But I do feel like there's more pressure. So I guess 2 aspects of pressure that you referenced, right? One is on the kids themselves. I'm amazed by how resilient these kids are. Because you mentioned 10-year-olds. I've seen second and third graders come into a similar environment and still kind of manage it. I think below that, and this is just a personal, uninformed position, I don't want to see first grade kids or even really young second grade kids there because they're babies at that point. They're still just developmentally younger. But I do notice somewhere around like 8, 9, and 10, there's almost, maybe it's a biological shift as they're getting ready for like prepubescence or whatever. They just seem more capable of handling that. And I know for me as a kid, I was probably in bed by 9 o'clock, like stuffed animals and the whole nine at like 8 or 9 years old. And here's Jackson, coming in from 2 workouts back to back, and he's wolfing down some food at 9 o'clock, and he just takes it in stride.
They don't know anything different.
Right. And that's just it.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm unfortunately, anybody that's listened to more than a few episodes has heard me say this 1,000 times, but kids will rise or fall to the level of expectations that you set. And so for us, there is no option with it. Like, this is how it is. And again, I don't want to sound like, I'm a taskmaster here, but like, they are the ones that are driving this.
Right.
My kids are the ones that say they want to be professional athletes or college athletes. So this is what it entails. And thankfully, they're all in. It works great. But we were speaking, Sharon, about sort of an overcommitment in terms of either specializing in one sport that's now every sport is year round, right? So it's almost impossible to juggle multiple sports the way you did successfully, Bobby. Any thoughts on sort of that culture and any change that you see maybe coming down the road?
So the year round youth sports culture isn't necessarily driven by developing good athletes. It's driven by, it's a business now. And what's happening is that if one of the reasons why, whether they know it or not, why coaches are pretty much demanding you to do their team year round is for, because they don't want to lose you. So it's just it's this idea that if you go and do another sport, that might pull you away. And so it's just, it's big business. It's big money. It's big business. And not necessarily the coach is saying like, oh, this is the only way that you're going to get to be a good player. It actually isn't really driven by that. Because we know that a lot of our current professional athletes didn't play year-round sport.
Right.
And, there's, like, for example, football is a sport that you really don't play year-round. So it's not a necessity to play a sport year-round. Now, there are some things that you should do year-round. I mean, basketball is a skill where you should be doing some sort of training year-round, but not necessarily playing AAU tournaments year-round. You know what I'm saying? So the year-round play is definitely becoming almost kind of like a negative. Like, people are realizing it's negative because they connect it to injuries, and they connect it to overuse, and they connect it to like that they can't juggle multiple sports. And so, but yet it's not going to change. It's literally like saying like we don't like the way the stock market's running, so let's try to change it. Like, It's not. Just at this point, it's so money driven, and it's so ingrained in the business model that it's just not going to change. What the hard thing, like what we were talking about, is perhaps within the model it might change. So like, we're starting to see some of the clubs, like Bobby works with a girls basketball with Sarah. So they're bringing him in because those kids don't have time to come to RYPT. And that is really, I think that's really forward thinking. I think it's a really smart thing to do, because like, I just had a talk with a dad the other day whose son plays 5 days a week of basketball. He's a junior in high school. So 5 days a week of basketball, 3 days a week of soccer, basketball and soccer on the weekends. And he wants to do RYPT. And I'm like, I'm sorry, bud, but that isn't going to happen in this model. You don't have the time. You can't go from a soccer game to a basketball practice to RYPT. It's too much. Like, at some point, that is just promoting the overtraining. It has to be worked into their practice schedule so that, like, say they're 5 days a week of basketball, 2 of them is 45 minutes of skill and 45 minutes of lifting or something like that. But it's just it's a really hard sell. And even Bobby was working with a soccer club down the street from us, and they were coming and they were lifting, and it was great. And then I think it was like a European coach said, oh, no, we need them. All their training needs to have a soccer ball. So they're going to bring in a guy from somebody to come to the field and do all their speed and agility work with a soccer ball. I'm like thinking in my head, but
on their field, right?
You know, I'm like, don't they already spend hours and hours with a soccer ball?
Right.
Like this, they need the opposite of that. They need the other movements. They need, you know, to be moving their bodies in ways that they don't move when they're on the soccer field to stay healthy and uninjured and all that kind of stuff. But man, it's a hard sell.
And your boys play baseball as well, correct?
Yes.
I feel like baseball might be the single most intensive in terms of the year-round training, right? Because it's like you said, I think basketball might be the easiest in terms of playing year-round, just because it's indoors. It's and you can spread it out and do tournaments and whatnot. But there's also a pressure to do more and do outside work. So it's, doing speed and agility, speed and conditioning, or skills training or whatever. Baseball, I mean, there's, all sorts of stuff depending on what you're doing. I'm sure there's pitching training and hitting training and just all kinds of stuff. And I feel like there's sort of an innate pressure. If you're a part of the further along you go down that rabbit hole, the loftier the club that you're with, now you have to do everything together as a group, as a unit. And if you don't, let's say you don't have the time to do this one training or whatever, you sort of get ostracized, I would think, which seems like a pretty big challenge. But as far as the bringing RYPT to the team, so Sarah's Jersey Shore Elite team has been working with RYPT, and I love it. I got to watch, I caught part of one of the sessions, and what I love and respect about you so much is the intensity level that you bring to them and demand of them is something that people would probably assume, a D1 football team or basketball team. And I love it because some of the girls looked a little shell-shocked. I don't think they were ready for it.
They were not ready.
No, but that's good because, I mean, that's how you excel. That's how you improve. It's, you need to get out of your comfort zone in anything. I mean, if you're comfortable with what you're doing, you're not doing the right thing, I think. And if you're willing to speak on it, what has that experience been like in terms of like sort of the on-site training versus, a home field game for you?
Right. And it all depends on their age level. Like when she was like, oh, well, can you do this with our high school team? And I was like, I don't want to. And she's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, they need some type of resistance. They need to lift. We need to get these girls stronger. The younger group, yeah, absolutely. I can get out there, do some body weight exercise with them, get some jumping, landing properly, and get them moving. Absolutely. And that'll be a great way to have these girls see me and realize, wow, this is something that I need to invest more time in if I want to get better at this sport. And it just goes out there, and it's like, that's where my environment is, and I love it. Like young, athletic girls or males, just like kids, like that's a blank canvas. They don't know wrong yet. So I can just teach them exactly what to do, how to do it, and they're going to succeed. And I love just like giving demos and be like, do exactly what I do and you're going to be successful. You understand that? That's how you do it.
Right.
Like, okay.
So my respect level for you was already through the roof. But this one night in particular at St. Mary's, I remember it on its face and by description, it seems like the simplest thing. It was essentially high knees. They were running with high knees, and these girls were not getting it. And I loved that you were able, I mean, I don't know if you were getting frustrated or not. I was on your behalf. I felt it, sort of by osmosis. And I remember thinking like, it was just a long day. And I'm like, man, I'm aggravated. I just want to go home and like, and you're still there working with them. And it was great to see you not waver at all, in terms of, again, the intensity level. They just had to keep going and trying again. And, I like that. I like that. I like that girls are held to that same standard because, again, I don't want to get on the soapbox, but I've seen a lot of girls' games and boys' games, and unfortunately, they do tend to get officiated differently. Like at older levels, 6th, 7th grade girls that are traveling with the ball, double dribbling, like the refs are like, oh, it's okay, they're still learning. I'm like, what? Like, are you kidding me? Like, no,
right.
You wouldn't do that if this was middle school boys' team.
Yeah.
And we've spoken at length about fitness and the importance of just everything that we've covered. How about nutrition in terms of either your own personal, your home situation, either working with Brady or even in terms of the training program that you do? Because I feel like so much energy and effort is wasted in the gym by what happens in the kitchen. So any words to say on that?
I think, everyone wants to learn about nutrition. Everyone wants more information about it, but no one wants to do it. That's where like kids come in and like, I want to start, bumping up my nutrition, start eating healthy. And it's like, all right, let's sit down. Let's actually see what you're eating. And then you see, and you're like, what do you mean you want to gain weight? You didn't eat anything back the time you left school to get here. And there was 3 hours. And they're like, well, I didn't know I should. And they're like, well, yeah, it's just educating them to realizing food is fuel. And if you want to perform at that level, you need to fuel yourself properly to get that same result. And we have some girls that come right from school, they go right to Wawa and they sit there and just eat junk. And I'm like, you realize 45 minutes in, when we're about to hit the weights, everything, your energy just starts going down. Do you realize that? Because I see it. And they're like, oh. I'm like, it's because what you're fueling yourself with right now. It's short-term energy. You're having all this sugar in your body right now. Then 45 minutes in, as soon as we get to the weight room, you're going to be dead.
But I love that you're able to provide that education, right? So funny enough, my friend Danielle, her nutrition coaching business is called Food Fuels Growth. And when I started working with her, that was the first time I ever considered it. You mentioned boys being sports cars. Mm-hmm. And I kind of made that equation where I said, wow, like you wouldn't go and just dump some crappy, homemade gasoline mm-hmm. into a Ferrari, right? Like if you expect high performance, you need to, put the right things in. And at least for me, I mean, I was 40 and I was fairly knowledgeable, again, in terms of nutrition and fitness, but it just never clicked for me until I worked with her. And so I think that's a really critical aspect, even if you're just bringing it up as a general topic and not providing, nutritional information or counseling or advice, because just the dietary situation in this country is just a disaster. And I think it really impacts younger athletes more than anyone else, especially in families maybe where the primary purchaser of food isn't really involved in sports or may not understand it. I think we were discussing that. If you want to kind of...
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like if you're talking with a kid who lives at home, they're not cooking their food. They're not preparing their food. They're not even probably making their lunches or their snacks. It's usually the mom who's doing the shopping. And oftentimes, just because the moms are now our age and maybe didn't play sports because it's just, the evolution of women's sports, they don't maybe have the understanding. And the problem is it's really tough. And now there's no excuse if you're a high school athlete. Like you should be eating healthy. If you're a young kid, like at the age of our kids, or like we have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, their palate is very minimal. I mean, there's only so much they'll eat. And so really most moms are just wanting their kids to eat. I don't care what they're going to eat. If they're going to eat mini muffins for breakfast, at least they're eating, and that is true. Like they need to eat. And so there's this optimistic idea that we can just expose them to hummus and carrots and this and that, and then they'll eat them, but some don't. Some kids just don't. And so I think what we are trying to do is develop healthy relationships with food, because you also don't want to do complete deprivation. I mean, if
Absolutely.
you just say you are never eating Doritos ever because they're horrible for you, you know what they're going to do? They're going to go sneak Doritos every moment.
Absolutely.
And so there has to be everything in moderation. And, I said with Brady, so like our gym's right next to the Wawa. So he'll come over and he'll say, hey, can I go get a snack at Wawa? And I'll say, yes, choose a healthy choice. Make a healthy choice. I don't give him any instruction. I just say, make a healthy choice. So his healthy choice is like, instead of getting Doritos, he'll get like the popcorn chips. And instead of getting regular potato chips, maybe he'll get the baked ones. And then he usually gets a little thing of like pineapple or something, because he understands that fruit and vegetables are healthy. And all I'm really wanting him to do is kind of think about it. And a lot of kids don't even think about it. There's not even a thought process going on. Because I know he's not going to go and buy a protein shake and, like some carrot sticks. Like, I know that's not going to happen. So I think that there definitely can be some education at a young age. And if they're motivated to be athletes, then you can connect the dots. You can say, do you want to be a good athlete? And if you do, you need to eat healthy. And let's figure out what healthy is. And it doesn't have to be, like completely eating clean and never ever eating chips and never ever eating, bad stuff. But they're just, if that's in their mind at a young age, then, they can, it's so tricky with the young kids because we're not quite sure what their mental capacity is. Like, I don't know, can they handle the stresses that are being put on them from a brain development type of thing? Do they understand? Are they making these connections? Because every once in a while I'll ask Brady a question that I think is a pretty obvious answer, and it comes back to me in a very simplified way.
Right.
Like I'll say, like, what do you need? What else can you do in a game besides just shooting and scoring that still lets you be an important part of the team? And he'll be like, play good.
Right.
Like, that's not quite what I'm getting at.
That's definitely a boy thing. I can, for
like,
sure.
How about
I know that
effort
from
and defense and
I know. God forbid I ask a question like that to Sarah, I'm going to get the Gettysburg Address. But Jackson or Tim, it's like a 2-word thing.
Right.
And you're right too. Like in terms of realistic expectations with kids, right? Like again, there's the Instagram ideal of the hummus celery stick kid or whatever. But I think what makes the most sense in terms of an approach is what you said, which is education and exposure, but reasonable exposure, right? It's saying, hey, here are some options, try them all, or see what you like, and also arming them with information. So that's such a great approach that you take with Brady, because and maybe he's not at this level in terms of his thought process, right? But for me, I hate deprivation. I think it's not a sustainable approach at all. So I hate bad diets. When people say, I'm cutting out carbs, I'm like, oh, so you're cutting out something your body needs. Great. Good job. Like, good luck with that. Yeah. And so with kids, but there are certain things that I personally try to avoid, added sugars and then trans fats, and really just certain processed things in general. And so I feel like if you have kids, like, again, I was really proud of my kids. One time we went to Whole Foods and they were reading labels and they were like, oh, look, sugar's not the first ingredient on this, can we get it or whatever. And so I think it's less about making them eat a certain way or having them want to eat a certain way, and more about arming them with the knowledge so that they think critically about those choices and make their own decisions. Because listen, once in a while, if he wants to grab something else that's on the bad side of the food spectrum, that's fine. Because one of my previous guests talked about living an 80-20 lifestyle, right? So 80% of the time he eats as well as he possibly can. It's great. But then the other 20% could be the weekend, could be a vacation. He allows himself that leeway to go in that direction. And especially with kids, I think it's important because, like you said, no matter how well you can model it for them, no matter how much information you give them, if you deprive them of something, they'll find a way to get it. Like as soon as they get to school, how many kids toss that healthy lunch in the trash and take from their buddies, So really, it's like anything else, right? We just do the best that we can. And you guys clearly model that in terms of your own lifestyle, being fit and having it be sort of a part of just your day-to-day, lifestyle. I think is great for your boys. I think the future is bright for them, for sure. So I am so thrilled that I got to sit down and speak with both of you about all of these topics. In terms of the RYPT program, we're currently in the spring. Will you guys be doing a summer session?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we evolve around the high school season. So fall, winter, spring, summer. Right now, like our fall, winter, and spring is 12 weeks long. Summer is going to be 7 weeks long. Then we have some makeup opportunities, or new athletes come in, get evaluated, try the program out before they, invest and set themselves up for the future program. But yeah, right now we're getting ready for the summer. Parents are calling what's going on for the summer. So that's going to be starting up at the end of June. Yeah,
so just to close out then, in terms of anybody who's listening who has young athletes who are interested in learning more about the process, what can they expect? Like, I'm brand new, I want to come to RYPT. What is my first steps there?
Well, first question I always ask is what age the athlete is, so depending on what the program is. And then also getting some information about them. Why are you looking for us? What are you expecting from us? What are you lacking, or what do you like to see in your son or daughter to improve on? And then it's just reiterating that information that we do to them, where they can see what the process is going to be, how long it's going to take. And then it's biggest thing is just staying consistent. The athletes that show up often are the ones that are going to get better.
And it doesn't matter which sport they do. Primarily, it's more. And what is the age range specifically?
So we have like a Mighty Rip program, probably like I would say second, third, fourth graders. Then Junior Ripped is the middle school athletes, and then our high school Ripped, and then now our college kids will be coming home this summer. So we'll have a college program coming up in the end of May for them.
Okay, great. And if anybody wants to register for an evaluation or whatever, is there a website?
They can just go to igotRip.com, sit up for a free evaluation, set up a time, and we offer those in between programs.
I got RYPT, correct?
Yep, RYPT.com.
Okay, awesome.
I remember when he first started Ripped, he was just going to do high school and college. Like he wanted to do the serious athletes. And we designed our facility after the Olympic Training Center. And this is not, this is a serious training facility. And we always said, we're not doing birthday parties. We're not doing fat camps. We're not doing, like this kind of stuff, which we still don't, by the way. So I still say that even though his ages have gotten younger because of just out of demand, really, from where youth sports are. He went to the middle school Ripped, Junior Ripped, and then there was a demand for younger, so he did Mighty Ripped. It's still a serious training facility, and that's what I say to like a lot of my parents that I communicate with or patients and their siblings. Like this is a place where an athlete comes to get to the next level. So whether it's they want to make the A team, or they want to make the JV to the varsity team, or they want to pursue college athletics. This is where athletes come to get to the next level. It's not necessarily just a, babysitting situation. So I always say that, like you need to have real goals. And that's as long as your kid is mature enough to, kind of realize that this is where they are going to come to get better at sports and whatnot. Second grade and on really is, yeah.
Right. And I think having realistic expectations and goals coming in, I would imagine is pretty important because, and also having, I feel like maybe the more specific and reasonable the goal, the higher the likelihood of success, right? Because if somebody just comes in and says, I want my kid to be a better athlete, that's kind of tough to work with, I would imagine, right?
Absolutely,
at
be more specific.
Age,
yeah. Well, I can tell you personally that the quality of what you guys do is off the charts. But the biggest benefit, obviously my kids have excelled in their respective sports from working with you guys, but selfishly and personally, you guys give something that's incredibly rare to get in this crazy sports world, and it's peace of mind. It is such an anxious role as a parent to feel like you're trying to guide your child towards their dreams. And I know for me, I try to make the best decisions that I can. I try not to regret anything, because when you make decisions, you make it with the information that you have at hand. And, hindsight's 20/20, right? But I can tell you that for my kids that have worked with you guys, and Jackson's coming eventually, we're getting him there. It was easily one of the best decisions that we've made because I know that they're that much closer to achieving their goals. So thank you guys for providing what you provide. And I hope that more kids will get there because it's just going to benefit all of them.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So thank you guys so much for taking the time to come and chat today. And thank you everybody for listening wherever and whenever you are.